OK, we're just waiting for the Champions League draw. We have Patrick Clive at one of those at the ready. We've got Kevin Hatchard here to take us through all of this. Seeding's no longer a factor. Clubs from the same country could face each other. We're kind of hoping for fun it's not going to be Man City against Chelsea. Tell us how it works. We're going to know the route to the final, pretty much, aren't we?
Yeah, so they're going to draw the quarterfinals, but they're also going to draw the semi-finals, and they're going to do that for the other European competitions as well. So that is going to be exciting. So you can plot your way through to the final. I think this year, more than most, actually, Hayley, it's a brilliantly open draw. There are so many teams that can win it, because you've had a situation where Real Madrid drew Liverpool and Paris drew Bayern. So there's two heavyweights knocked out at this stage already. So it's great. We could get some, imagine if we had a Milan derby, imagine if Napoli get Benfica. There are some mouth-watering prospects in this draw.
There are. Just to remind you of the dates as well. So the first leg of the quarterfinal is going to be played on April the 11th or 12th. The return legs, April the 18th and 19th. The first legs of the semi-final stage, May the 9th or 10th for the first leg. The return at May the 16th and 17th. It will be interesting when we do get to the draw to see which teams will be home and away, who they've got in the Premier League around that as well. I've got my little calculations map all to take you through all of that. Kevin will provide the expert analysis and I will try and provide you with a bit of geography, a bit of travelling, how that's going to impact things. The final is going to take place on June the 10th at the Ataturk Olympic Stadium in Istanbul in Turkey. So we're just waiting for the draw to be done here. Great to actually see English teams involved yet again at this stage of the competition, isn't it? It's so healthy.
Well, they've been incredibly strong in the last few years. And of course, we've had finals that have been all English affairs. We had Chelsea and Manchester City just a couple of seasons ago. Obviously, Liverpool have been incredible in this tournament in the last few years. And I think the rest of Europe does fear that growth with the Premier League because it has been such a healthy situation for English clubs in the Champions League in recent years.
Well, will this team that Patrick Clive are picking, who we know are going to take... Oh, it's Chelsea he's just taken out of the pot, following on from Real Madrid being picked. So it's Real Madrid against Chelsea. What do you think of that?
What's remarkable about that is they produced one of the ties of the whole tournament last season because it looked as though Real Madrid were going to go through after they played so well in the first leg. Then Chelsea went over there, nearly did the impossible and turned things around, only for one of the goals of the tournament, that incredible outside of the boot pass from Luka Modric to find Rodrigo, volley on the run, brilliant goal, and that's what turned it back in Real's favour. So that's going to be a fascinating tie.
Yes, we've got Inter Milan here, who've just been drawn out of the pot, of course, trailing Napoli and Serie A, looking to go all the way. First time, actually, 3 Italian teams have got through to the quarter-finals since 17 years. They're going to take on Benfica, Kevin. How do you think that's going to be?
I think both of them will see that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Certainly Benfica will. Benfica got to the quarter-finals last season. They were undone by Liverpool, but they gave them a hell of a game over the 2 legs. Inter weren't that great against Porto, but they have done well in cup competitions since Simone Inzaghi went there.
You wonder if the English teams will be eyeing that up as a potential semi-final. They wouldn't mind one of those 2 teams. We've got Manchester City now out of the pot. Wondering who Manchester City are going to be facing. A lovely little... I don't want to say anything and get Kevin's thoughts because we desperately just want to find out who they're going to face. Rolling out that little bit of paper. They will take on Bayern Munich.
Wow. Pep Guardiola Classico.
Oh,
so that's, I mean, that narrative is there. Obviously, Guardiola was in Munich for 3 very successful seasons, but he never got to a Champions League final when he was in Munich. I don't think it's a great matchup tactically for Bayern because they play a very high line and Erling Haaland's going to really enjoy that. So it'd be fascinating to see how Bayern try and deal with Haaland because they were able to contain Mbappe over the 2 legs.
You just wonder what Pep Guardiola is going to be thinking about that one. Goodness me. Well, next up, we have AC Milan, and they are going to be taking on Napoli. So the 2 Italian teams, grudge match. They are going to go head-to-head. Oh, it's going to be tasty. Yeah,
it's going to be great because Milan were the champions last season. Napoli have almost certainly taken that Scudetto from them. But Milan know Napoli. inside out, but they'll have to play far better, I think, than they did in patches against Tottenham. Tottenham didn't really test them over those 2 legs. Napoli certainly will. And I think defensively, even though Milan have improved recently, they weren't great at the start of this year. So that is a really good test, I think, for Milan's defence, because it is a young defence.
Yeah, so it's AC Milan against Napoli in the quarter-finals. Inter Milan up against Benfica. It's Bayern Munich taking on Manchester City, and Real Madrid versus Chelsea. They're just drawing the semi-finals now, so the winner of the quarter-final 4th pick is going to be up against, so that would be AC Milan or Napoli. In the quarter-final, going to be taking on the winners of quarter-final 2. So Benfica, Inter Milan. So you've got all 3 Italian teams. Oh my gosh, so
you could have a Milan derby in the semis, but I think all 4 of those clubs, having avoided the English teams and having avoided Real Madrid, will look at that and think, wow, we can actually get to this final. If you're Benfica, top of the Primera Liga, going ever so well, top their group ahead of Paris Saint-Germain, played really well in the last 16, like went through with no troubles. They will look at this and think, that's our route to the final, we can do this. Napoli will think absolutely the same. This is uncharted territory for them to some extent because they've never been this far, but they're playing so well at the moment. If they can keep the likes of Osimhen and Kvaratskhelia fit, they've got every chance of going all the way to the final.
And should Chelsea beat Real Madrid and Manchester City beat Bayern Munich, it could be City-Chelsea in the semi-final, couldn't it? What about that?
It'd be great. It'd be really interesting. I think any of those potential matchups are going to be fascinating. Manchester City will think, oh, great, we've got to beat Bayern, and then potentially we might have to have Real Madrid or Chelsea in the semis. So if they're going to win it this year, they're going to have to win it the hard way. But that is the case in the Champions League. At this stage of the competition, you have some of the very best teams on the planet battling for that trophy. I think it's a great draw. I think it's really interesting. And I'm kind of pleased in a way that some of those clubs, like Napoli, like Benfica, have avoided the more established teams because it gives them ever such a great chance of reaching the final.
But what about the chances that City and Chelsea have got? Has that gone down slightly now that we know the opposition? They almost couldn't have picked 2 of the 2 harder teams. Yeah,
really tricky. Really, really tricky, because Real Madrid, they've got a massive game this weekend, El Clasico against Barcelona. They're 9 points behind. So if they lose that game, that's pretty much La Liga done with. So it's going to be all about the Champions League. They have one of the best players on the planet right now in Vinicius Junior. When you think of what he's had to deal with on and off the pitch in Spain in terms of some of the abuse that he's received, for that young man to perform as well as he has, it's really quite remarkable. So pressure, that's not a thing for him. He scored the winner in the final last season, so you've got all that quality. Bayern, I watched them a lot in the Bundesliga. When they click, they are really, really good. And the control they played with in Paris against the team with Lionel Messi in it, with all of that quality they have, they completely controlled the game, more or less from start to finish, until Mbappe was able to come on. So they'll go into it with no fear.
What about Pep Guardiola? I mean, yes, they've got the top scorer in their ranks. Yes, they've got Erling Haaland. Yes, Bayern are going to have to compete with him. But up against a manager who knows Bayern so well, it's a bit of a, well, you just kind of wonder what Pep thinks about all of this, because he's so desperate to win the Champions League with Manchester City.
I think the danger, Hayley, is that sometimes, whether he accepts this or not, there's a body of evidence to say that Pep Guardiola in the Champions League sometimes not overthinks, but he sees all the dangers, because he's such an astute coach. He sees all of the dangers, and I think sometimes he focuses more on neutralising the opposition than focusing on what his teams do well. We saw it against Lyon when he played an unfamiliar formation. We saw it against Chelsea in the final, where Rodri was left out of the starting 11 and it was an unusual lineup and it didn't work. We saw it with Bayern when he was there. You know, he would pick unusual formations or unusual teams, and they never got past the semi-final stage. So because he knows Bayern so well, the danger is that he reacts to that and diverges from what he does so well with City in the Premier League week in, week out. The different factor here is the Haaland factor. Yes. Bayern have seen off Messi and Mbappe. Now they've got to come up with a plan to deal with Erling Haaland, because when he was at Dortmund, he consistently scored goals against Bayern. So they couldn't deal with him then.
So Haaland will be rubbing his hands.
Yeah, absolutely, because Bayern play a very high line. They rely on the likes of De Ligt and Upamecano to get back into position if necessary. They're very front foot defenders. Haaland will love that. He's always trying to run in behind. He's always trying to stretch a team. If City can get their passing right to him, he could do all kinds of damage.
Yeah, so we know City obviously unbeaten. If they continue, if they go through, if they beat Bayern Munich, they could take on Chelsea, if they get past Real Madrid, which would mean on May the 16th or 17th, if both these sides progress, the deciding leg will come before Chelsea take on Manchester City away in the penultimate game of the Premier League season. And we could be talking about a title race battle between Arsenal and City. Chelsea could be up there in the mix. They're both involved in the Champions League. So that's going to be a fascinating week.
Yeah, and I think what's equally fascinating about it is the fact that Chelsea have really come unstuck against City at times this season, struggled against them in the FA Cup. It was a really heavy defeat, struggled against them in the league as well. They have improved in recent games. Thought Kai Havertz and Joao Felix against Dortmund over 2 legs were outstanding. If they can maintain that level of performance and Graham Potter's team can keep heading in the right direction, then they might cause City a problem. But as things stand, City will look at a potential tie against Chelsea and think, we'd probably rather play them than play Real Madrid.
Yeah, just throw that in there. We mentioned obviously Haaland up against German opposition again, but what about Joao Cancelo, who left Manchester City in the circumstances that you don't think anyone expected that? Now going back up against his former, so he'll be absolutely wanting, I don't know, maybe a bit of revenge. Yes, he left, but I don't think it was his decision, was it, really? He'll be looking to show them what they're missing now.
Well, it's a running theme, Hayley, if you think about it, because Joao Cancelo wasn't, at the time he left City, regularly getting in the team as much as he was. I think it's fair to say his performance level wasn't as high as it had been. And people just assumed, I think, that as soon as he got to Munich, he was going to be a lock. He was going to play in every single game. Hasn't actually worked out that way. On the left-hand side of the defence, Alphonso Davies has stepped up a gear because he's thought, oh, there's somebody who could potentially play my position. So he's really improved. They've experimented tactically with a few things. Benjamin Pavar's played on that right-hand side at times. So, and they've played Josip Stanisic, who's a young player, ahead of Cancelo in certain games. So Julian Nagelsmann, the Bayern coach, said a couple of weeks ago, look, I had to sit down with Joao and just explain to him that I value him as a player, but he doesn't completely understand how we work and he isn't going to be in every single game. But he did make the point, he's the kind of guy that if it's not going well and he's not playing regularly, he doesn't like it.
Oh, so Chelsea are bidding to lift the trophy for a 3rd time. It'll be a first piece of silverware for Graham Potter. He's had a real tough time at Chelsea. It started on a high, he's then had a dreadful low. They've obviously stuck with him. He seems to have turned a bit of a corner, but how much would progressing through, I mean, they'll be hoping to try and get to a final for Graham Potter to show the fans that, you know, he is the manager and he is worthy of having that job.
It's a big opportunity. I think if you look at the home game against Dortmund, Dortmund were in good form. Chelsea probably definitely over the 2 legs deserved to go through. They probably edged the first leg, but there was a brilliant goalkeeping performance that stopped them. In the second leg, thought they were outstanding. Front players played really well. I think Joao Felix, I mean, I don't know how many times he's hit the woodwork since he's gone there, but I think he's played really well for them. I think there was a feeling performances were improving before the results did, if you look at some of the data, the underlying numbers. But this is rarefied air for Graham Potter. He's not coached at this level. He deserves a shot at it. I really admire Chelsea for sticking with it, sticking with that project, because you've asked him to take over with no pre-season. You've asked him to take over with a load of new players going in there at once. So good luck with that. He's stuck with it. I think he's carried himself with great dignity.